Welcome back, everybody. I am your host, as always, Gary Winter. This is our next video in our Trust 101 series for trustees and beneficiaries of trust. And welcome to the first video in phase 2, which is liquidating assets and paying bills. For those of you who haven't seen our previous videos in phase 1, I encourage you to go back and check those out. We have a whole series on getting installed as a trustee, notifying beneficiaries, sending notices out, and collecting different types of assets, and eventually getting them all appraised. So if you are at that point in the process and you're a trustee, congratulations. You've finished phase 1. Welcome to phase 2. And today in this video, we're going to be talking about liquidating assets. Liquidating meaning a fancy word for selling stuff. And so in our video today, I want to give you some things to think about. Number one, does the will or trust even authorize the sale of the asset? Number two, do we even need to sell the asset to generate cash? How do we go about selling? Number three, do we do for sale by owner, or we do licensed brokers or investment advisors? So those are the topics that we're going to hit in this video on liquidating assets. So right out of the gate, does the will or trust provide for a specific distribution of an asset? And by specific distribution, if you don't remember that term from our previous videos, what that is a specific gift of a specific item of property or a piece of real property to a certain beneficiary or beneficiaries. And if the will or trust has that in there that we're distributing, then we really need to give that and distribute that item outright to our beneficiary. So review the will and trust and look for those things. Also check if there is a personal property memorandum. That's a document that somebody can write for sentimental personal property items that would allow them to give small things that are of low value, less than $5,000 a piece and less than $25,000 cumulatively, you know, like a watch or a clock or something like that they wanted to give to a certain person. So take a look at the trust itself for specific distributions. Take a look and see if there's a personal property memorandum, and if there is, you need to follow those, and we need to make those specific distributions outright. We generally want to do that as soon as possible. So that's our first look, if the will provides for a specific distribution. The second thing that we would suggest that trustees consider when they're talking about selling assets is, do we even need to sell it? Trusts and trustees are generally authorized to distribute property outright to the beneficiaries. They may not have to sell. Like, for example, the trust may not say that this particular item must be sold. It's worth taking a look again at the trust and see if there's any specific requirement that we sell an asset. The primary reason for liquidating or selling would be either we need cash to pay bills, or the beneficiaries really don't want that asset. So ask your beneficiaries, talk to them, say, would you rather have this particular asset, or would you rather just have cash? And if so, we can liquidate it inside the trust and then distribute cash rather than distributing an asset outright to you. There's good reasons why we might or might not want to make a distribution of a piece of property to our beneficiaries. For example, if we have a piece of real property and we have 3 beneficiaries that are inheriting it, a third, and a third, they may not want to be effective partners if we distributed the real property out to them and gave them each a 33% interest in that real property. Now the beneficiaries are kind of partners on that property, and it's a little bit difficult to sell a fractional interest in a property. So that 33% owner can't just put his 33% on the market typically. He's now got to sell to the other people anyway. So usually it's a good idea to avoid those situations, except in exceptional circumstances where people are really getting along, or maybe you're trying to preserve farmland or something like that. So take a look and see if we even do need to sell, if it's wise to sell the asset. And lastly, is it a bad time to sell? So one of the great things about trusts and trust administration is you're not operating under the court's docket timeline. So in probate, when we're doing will-based administration, you got to work with the court, and the court wants to get the case closed within a reasonable time frame. But and it's not to say that in trust administration you don't have forever, but you certainly have a more flexible timeline in trust administration than you do in probate. And so what that means is you can maybe take some time and take a look and say, well, is it a bad time in the market to sell a particular piece of property? And maybe the idea would be to hang on to it for a little bit if we think that the market is going to turn around or come back up, or if it's a particular stock or mutual fund or something and the investment advisors say, hey, it's not really a great time to sell, then think about it and say, well, should I just distribute it outright to them and let the beneficiaries receive that, or should I wait maybe a few months or 6 months or a year and eventually sell? So those are some things to think about as to whether we even need to do this and liquidate the asset at all. Assuming that we are going to sell though, how do we do it? Well, first of all, use the appraised value as a guide. If you don't have an appraisal, then go back and watch my previous video on this, which is the last video in phase 1, where we talk about how to get an appraisal and the benefits of an appraisal, but use that as a guide. Secondly, consider using something that we call a NOPA. And NOPA is an acronym for Notice of Proposed Action. A Notice of Proposed Action is a wonderful tool for trustees, and it allows you to comply with your duty to keep beneficiaries fully informed. That is one of our duties as a trustee, is to let people know what's going on, at least to a reasonable level. And one of the risks in selling assets is that somebody's going to complain in the future and say, wow, you sold that piece of property way too low, and I'm going to sue you for the difference of what the fair value was and the price that you sold for. So we protect our trustees by, first of all, getting an appraisal, using the appraised value. And second of all, once we have that and we engage a licensed broker to sell the real property, or we use an investment advisor, and if we're going to sell, maybe we circulate this written notice of proposed action. If you don't know how to do a notice of proposed action, that's a good trigger to probably call your trust attorney and have them help you with it. But essentially, it allows you to send out a written notice to the beneficiaries and say, hey, I'm planning on selling for this price. And if you have any problem with that, you need to object and let me know. And there's a time period to do that. It's only 14 days. And if they don't object, then the law says, hey, you had a chance to complain about this. And if you didn't complain after you got the NOPA, then you're precluded from complaining later, which is a really handy tool to minimize or mitigate your risk of future disputes regarding your sale price. So those are a couple of things to think about in terms of how we sell assets. Use the appraised value and use the NOPA. Finally, who sells the assets? Well, you can sell, obviously, vehicles. You know how to do that. Personal property items, we can engage an estate sale person, and they can come in and categorize everything and do an estate auction. Those are relatively easy to set up. And if things don't sell, then you can just donate them to charity. For vehicles, make sure that the vehicle is titled in you, as your name, I should say, as trustee of the trust. If you don't know how to do that, go back and watch our prior videos on collecting assets that have a pink slip. So getting them vested or titled in the name of you as trustee of the whatever the trust name is. And then you're going to be on the pink slip so that when you do sell, you can actually sign the pink slip over to the buyer as the trustee of the trust. For real property, obviously you need to use a licensed broker. I mean, that's just a given. And we could make an entire video just on this subject of selling real property out of a trust. My suggestion in this video, because it's probably beyond the scope to talk about all these things that we would want to think about in selling real estate from the trust, is use a broker that has specific experience with trusts or probate estates, because there are special rules for you as a seller of real estate in California if you're selling it out of a trust. So be very aware of that. And in the future, we'll probably make an entire video just on that topic. Lastly, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, use your investment advisor, rely on their advice, protect yourself. Don't make investment decisions if you're not licensed to do that. All right, so Quick review. So before you're selling assets, make sure you check the will and trust for specific gifts and make sure you're not liquidating something that's supposed to be distributed. Take a look and see if there's a personal property memorandum that addresses that. Think about whether there might be other sources of cash and maybe we don't need to sell. So ask yourself the question, why are we selling? Are we generating cash because we need to pay bills? Are we selling something because our beneficiaries really don't want to be partners in that asset? They'd rather just have the cash. And if we do sell, use the appraised value. Consider using a NOPA. If you don't know how to do a NOPA, then contact your trust attorney and they'll help you. And use licensed investment advisors to sell stocks, use licensed brokers to sell real estate. So hopefully this video was helpful for you in understanding a little bit about how we put assets on the market and sell them, some tips to protect you in the process and mitigate some of your risk. As always, do me a favor, like this video or subscribe for future notifications as our next videos in the series come out. And keep the comments coming. I really appreciate it when people say, hey, that was helpful, or if you have a topic that we haven't discussed that you'd like to hear, then put it in the comments below. And I hope to see you in the next video, and stay tuned.